My name is John. Hope this video don't scare you. I was sent to a remote cabin in Alaska. Things aren't right here.
I signed the contract in early June at a cramped Forest Service office in Ketchikan that smelled like wet nylon and old coffee. The woman who processed my paperwork didn't make eye contact, just slid the forms across the desk, pointed at the signature lines, and told me orientation started the next morning at 7 o'clock. That was it. The job was seasonal, natural resources technician, which sounded official, but mostly meant driving boats to remote sites, checking equipment, and filling out condition reports. I didn't care what they called it. I needed work that came with housing and kept me out of Seattle, and Alaska was about as far as I could get without leaving the country. I took every patrol they offered. Didn't matter if it was a last-minute fuel run or a weekend survey nobody else wanted. Christina Lewis, my supervisor, noticed that pretty fast. She started assigning me the trips that required early departures or rough water crossings or long stretches without cell service. The kind of work that made people complain or call in sick. I never complained, just showed up, catch a small. You see the same faces at the grocery store, the laundromat, the harbor. People start recognizing you. They ask where you're from, what brought you up here, if you've got family nearby, standard small-town stuff. I hated it. So I stayed in the field as much as possible, took the assignments that put me on islands with populations under 50, volunteered for the trips that involved camping near trail cameras, or testing stream gauges in places you couldn't reach by road. Christina was happy to oblige. I think she figured I was either running from something or too socially broken to function in town. She wasn't totally wrong. The thing about seasonal work is you're always expendable. They hire you for a fixed contract, usually May through September. And if you mess up or make waves, they just don't renew you. No severance, no appeals process. You're gone. I knew that going in, so I made myself useful, dependable. The guy who showed up 15 minutes early and triple-checked his gear. I carried extra fuel canisters even when the trip plan didn't call for them. I logged mileage down to the 10th of a nautical mile. I filled out the condition report forms in the exact format Christina wanted, with printed labels and timestamps and notes in the margins about weather and visibility. It wasn't hard, just tedious. But tedious worked for me. I didn't want to think too much. Didn't want downtime to sit around and process things. I wanted checklists and coordinates and machinery that either worked or didn't. Christina treated me like I was disposable anyway. She'd call me at 6 o'clock in the morning and tell me a transport got moved up and I needed to be at the dock in 40 minutes. Or she'd reassign me mid-trip because another crew couldn't make their schedule. Once she sent me to check a weather station that had already been serviced the week before. I mentioned it politely, and she just said to verify the previous crew's work and file a supplemental report. I did it, didn't argue. Other people avoided her assignments. I heard them trade shifts or suddenly remembered doctor's appointments when she started talking about certain sites. There was one cabin near Salmon Bay that had a reputation for bad foundations and mice in the walls. Nobody wanted to spend a night there. Christina asked me 3 times that summer. I went every time. I figured she was testing me, seeing how much I'd tolerate before I pushed back. I never gave her a reason to cut me loose. Aurora George started showing up on my assignments in July. She was a wildlife technician, older, maybe late 50s, with steel gray hair she kept in a braid, and the kind of hands that looked like they'd been working outdoors for decades. She didn't talk much at first, just nodded when Christina introduced us and started loading her gear into the skiff. I thought she was there to babysit me, make sure the rookie didn't screw up or get lost or do something that would create paperwork. But she never acted like that. She just worked. She'd check my knots without commenting on them. If they were wrong, she'd redo them. If they were fine, she'd move on. Same with the equipment. She'd go through the supply list, compare it against what I'd packed, and quietly add the things I'd missed. A backup VHF battery, extra trash bags, a fire starter that actually worked in wet conditions. After a couple trips, I started packing better. She noticed. Didn't say anything, but I could tell she kept me from making mistakes I didn't even know were mistakes. Like the time I almost tied off to a log boom that looked stable, but wasn't anchored properly. Or when I started hiking a ridge trail in running shoes instead of boots, and she just handed me a pair of gaiters and said the brush gets thick. It did. I appreciated it. Didn't know how to say that without sounding like I needed a mentor. So I just kept my mouth shut and paid attention. By late September, we'd been paired together maybe a dozen times. It felt routine. She'd meet me at the harbor. We'd load the skiff, and Jimmy Romero, the guy who ran most of the transport routes, would take us wherever Christina had marked on the map. The morning Christina assigned us to Ella Bay, I was at the office early. She was on the phone when I walked in, talking to someone about a delayed permit. She waved me toward a chair and kept talking for another 5 minutes. When she hung up, she slid a printout across the desk. Grid coordinates, a supply checklist, and a 2-line description. Inspect bare cache at Prince of Wales cabin. Replace handheld radio battery. Aurora is meeting you at the dock at 0900. She said Jimmy will have the skiff ready. You'll be there 1 night, maybe 2, depending on weather. I scanned the printout. Ella Bay was on the northwest side of Prince of Wales Island, which meant a long ride and no easy bailout if conditions got rough. The cabin wasn't near any towns, wasn't near much of anything. Forecast good? I asked. Christina shrugged. Good enough. You've handled worse. That wasn't really an answer, but I didn't push it. I folded the printout and stood up. Anything else? I said. Don't forget the camera for the cache inspection, and make sure the radio replacement gets logged with a timestamp. Got it. She was already looking at her computer screen. I left. I met Aurora at the dock just before 9. She had her pack already loaded, her rain shell tied around her waist, and a thermos of coffee tucked into a side pocket. She looked at the printout when I showed it to her and nodded once. You been to Ella before? She asked. No. It's quiet. Not much out there. That was fine with me, I said. So, she almost smiled. Jimmy showed up a few minutes later, and we loaded the rest of the gear. I had the replacement battery and a waterproof case, the camera, extra fuel, and the usual overnight supplies. Aurora had her own pack, plus a rifle case, which wasn't unusual. Theirs were active this time of year. I knew the trip was isolated. Christina didn't send people to places that were convenient, and I knew it wasn't really optional. She'd framed it as an assignment, not a request, and I wasn't in a position to say no. I didn't mind. Isolation was kind of the point. We climbed into the skiff, and Jimmy started the engine. The water was calm enough. Gray sky, light chop, visibility maybe 3 miles. Standard September conditions. Aurora sat across from me and adjusted the straps on her pack. She didn't look concerned. I took that as a good sign. I didn't ask questions, just settled in for the ride and watched the harbor drop away behind us. Jimmy cut the engine about 20 feet from the dock and let the skiff drift in. He had the timing down. Didn't say much during the ride, just checked his watch twice and adjusted course when we passed a rocky point I didn't recognize. The water stayed calm the whole way. Took maybe 40 minutes. Aurora stood first and grabbed the dock post when we bumped up against it. I handed her pack up, then mine, then the rifle case. Jimmy tied off but didn't kill the engine completely, just throttled down. "Pickup's Friday," he said. "Morning tide. Be here at 7:30. Aurora nodded, weather permitting. "Weather's fine." Jimmy checked his watch again. "Got another run after this." That was it. He untied before I'd even climbed out of the skiff, pushed off with one boot against the piling, and swung back toward open water. Engine noise built up fast. I watched him go for a few seconds. He didn't look back. "He's always like that," Aurora said. She had her pack on already. Tide doesn't wait. I figured that was true. Didn't bother me much. I got my own pack settled and picked up the rifle case. Aurora shook her head and took it from me without asking. Fine by me. The dock wasn't in great shape. Some of the boards had gaps, and the whole thing leaned a little to the left. Didn't feel unsafe exactly, just old. We walked up toward the shore, and I got my first real look at the place. Ella Bay wasn't much. The beach was narrow, mostly rocks and driftwood piled up in uneven lines.
Trees started about 30 feet back from the high tide mark. Spruce and hemlock dense enough that I couldn't see far into them. The cabin sat just inside the tree line on a small rise. One room from the look of it. Dark wood siding, pitched roof with moss growing on the north side and a narrow porch across the front. There was a window on either side of the door, and one more on the side I could see. No lights on inside. We crossed the beach. My boots crunched on the rocks, and I had to step over a couple logs that had been there long enough to sink partway into the gravel. The air smelled like salt and wet wood and something else I couldn't place. Rot, maybe, or just old seaweed. Aurora walked ahead of me up a path that was barely a path, just a line where the ground cover looked a little more beaten down. She didn't slow down or check behind her. I kept up fine. The cabin had 2 steps leading up to the porch. The wood was gray and weathered, but solid when I tested it. Aurora pulled a key from her jacket pocket. Christina must have given it to her before we left and unlocked the door. It swung inward with a creak that sounded exactly like you'd expect. Inside was dim. Took a second for my eyes to adjust. One room, yeah, maybe 15 by 20 feet. A wood stove in the corner with a dented kettle on top. A table with 2 chairs pushed up against the opposite wall. A narrow cot on each side, both with thin mattresses and wool blankets folded at the foot. Shelves above the table held canned goods, a few boxes of pasta, a jar of instant coffee. There was a sink with a hand pump next to the stove, and a metal lockbox bolted to the wall near the door. The whole place smelled like old smoke and damp fabric, and something faintly chemical. Probably mouse poison. Aurora set the rifle case down near one of the Cias and shrugged off her pack. "Not bad," she said. "I've stayed worse." I believed her. I'd stayed worse too, though not by much. I dropped my pack by the other cot and looked around more carefully. The floorboards were uneven, but clean. Someone had swept recently. There were hooks by the door for coats and a small mirror nailed to the wall that had a crack running through it. The windows had curtains made from old bed sheets, both pulled back and tied with what looked like paracord. That's when I saw the list. It was taped to the wall above the table. Just a piece of printer paper, but someone had written on it with a thick black marker. The letters were big and uneven, like whoever wrote it had been in a hurry or didn't care how it looked. The tape was yellowed at the edges. I stepped closer. The first line said, "Cabin rules." Then below that, "Keep porch light off after dark. Don't answer voices from the trees. Never follow whistling. Boots stay inside. Tracks invite visitors. If you hear knocking, wait until morning." I read it twice. Didn't say anything right away. Aurora was over by the stove checking the flue. "List's been there a while," she said without turning around. "Someone with too much time on their hands." "Seems specific," she shrugged. "Bored people write weird stuff. I've seen worse at the Salmon Bay cabin. Someone drew a whole comic about a bear breaking in and stealing socks. That was probably true. Isolation did things to people. Still. You think it's a joke? I asked. Aurora straightened up and looked at me. You think it's not? I didn't answer. Wasn't sure what I thought yet. The rules didn't feel like a joke exactly. They felt personal. The handwriting was too deliberate. And the tape. Someone had checked it recently. Pressed the edges back down. The paper wasn't curling. Don't answer voices from the trees. Wasn't the kind of thing you wrote just to mess with people. Neither was tracks invite visitors. Aurora crossed to the table and glanced at the list without much interest. Look, she said, out here people get superstitious. They hear wind in the branches and think it's something else. They see shadows and convince themselves it's normal. You ever follow the rules? I asked. She paused, then nodded once. Yeah, doesn't hurt to be cautious. That felt like an answer and a non-answer at the same time. I let it go. I turned back to my pack and started unpacking. Extra clothes went on the shelf above my cot. Food supplies stayed in the pack for now. I pulled out the camera and set it on the table next to the waterproof case with the replacement battery inside. Aurora was doing the same on her side, organizing her gear in neat rows. My boots were still on. I unlaced them and set them next to the stove. Close enough to dry if they got wet, but not so close they'd scorch. That's what the list said. Boots stay inside. Aurora noticed, but didn't comment. The light coming through the windows was starting to fade. Wasn't sunset yet, but it was getting there. Maybe another hour of good daylight left. We'd need to check the cache before dark. Let's get the inspection done, Aurora said. She pulled on a fleece layer and grabbed a headlamp from her pack. Cache is about 100 yards north. Shouldn't take long. I nodded and grabbed my own jacket. The camera went into my pocket. We stepped back outside and the temperature had dropped a few degrees. The wind was picking up too, coming off the water in uneven gusts. I could hear it moving through the trees behind the cabin. A low, rushing sound that rose and fell. Aurora led the way around the side of the cabin and into the woods. There was a trail here, more obvious than the one from the beach. It wound between the trees in a gentle curve, and the ground was soft with moss and old needles. I kept my eyes on the path and tried not to think about the list. The cache was easy to spot. A metal box about the size of a chest freezer, painted forest green, and bolted to a wooden platform 6 feet off the ground. There was a ladder leaning against the platform, and a padlock hanging open on the latch. Aurora climbed up first. I heard her moving things around inside, counting under her breath. I waited at the bottom and took a few photos of the setup with the camera. The light was dim enough that I wasn't sure how well they'd turn out, but I got the angles Christina would want. Supplies are low, Aurora called down. We've got maybe 3 days of canned goods and 1 propane canister. No rice left, and the first aid kit's been opened. I made a note on my phone. Anything missing that shouldn't be? No, just used. She climbed back down, and I went up to get my own count. She was right. The cache had the basics: canned soup, beans, a box of crackers that hadn't been opened yet, some freeze-dried camping meals, and the propane. The first aid kit had bandages missing, and the antiseptic wipe box was half empty. Normal wear. I took another photo and climbed down. We walked back to the cabin without talking much. The wind was louder now, and the trees creaked when it hit them. I didn't hear any voices, didn't hear whistling either, just wind. Inside, Aurora got the stove going, and I pulled out the battery case. The broken radio was sitting right there on the table next to a sealed replacement. Someone had left them both out in the open, side by side. I picked up the dead one first. The casing was cracked along one edge, and the terminals were corroded. Looked like it had gotten wet, and someone had tried to dry it out too late. The replacement was still in shrink wrap, with a manufacture date from April. The whole setup felt wrong. Not the batteries themselves. That part made sense. But the way they were arranged, like someone had staged them, like they'd been waiting. I set the broken one down and looked at the new one. We'd swap it out in the morning, log it with a timestamp, take a photo for the report. Standard procedure. Aurora was boiling water for coffee. The stove ticked as it heated up, and the light through the windows had gone orange and thin. I couldn't shake the feeling that the broken radio had been sitting there too long, that whoever left it had known we were coming, that the whole assignment was set up for something I didn't understand yet. Probably nothing. Probably just the isolation getting to me already. But I kept thinking about the list, about boots and tracks and voices. I kept thinking about the way Aurora had said "yeah" when I asked if she followed the rules outside. The wind picked up again. I heard something creak on the porch. Just the board settling. Just the weather. I told myself that. Didn't quite believe it. The light was almost gone now. We had maybe 10 minutes before full dark. I glanced at the door and confirmed the porch light was off. It was. Aurora poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed me one without asking if I wanted it. I took it. The heat felt good against my palms. "Long day tomorrow," she said. "Get some sleep when you can." I nodded. Didn't mention that I probably wouldn't sleep much. The broken battery sat on the table between us, cracked and useless and waiting. The new one sat beside it, still sealed. The setup felt like a problem. I just didn't know what kind yet. Dark came on fast after that. Dusk dropped fast. I was still sitting at the table with the tin cup when the radio on the shelf near the door crackled once, loud enough that I flinched. Aurora didn't move, just kept her coffee raised halfway to her mouth. Static hissed for maybe 3 seconds. Then Christina's voice came through, clipped and clear. "Cooper. George, this is Lewis. Do you copy?" Aurora set her cup down and walked over to the shelf. She picked up the radio, pressed the side button. "Copy. This is George. Weather's moving in faster than predicted," Christina said. Her tone hadn't changed from the morning briefing, procedural like she was reading off a checklist. "Jimmy can't make the run back tonight. Pickup is delayed to 0700 tomorrow. Acknowledge." Aurora glanced at me. I nodded. She pressed the button again. "Acknowledged. We're secure. Stay put," Christina said. "Keep the radio on channel 6. Don't wander off site after dark. Confirm you have adequate shelter and supplies." "Confirmed," Aurora said. "Good. Lewis out." The channel went quiet. Aurora set the radio back on the shelf but didn't move away from it. I looked at the windows. Still some light left outside, but not much. maybe 20 minutes. The trees were already dark shapes against gray sky. I figured the weather thing made sense. September storms came in hard, and Jimmy wasn't the type to take risks with a skiff in rough water. Staying another night wasn't ideal, but it wasn't a disaster either. We had food, we had the stove, the cabin was solid enough. Aurora returned to the table and picked up her coffee. She didn't drink it, just held it. "Probably smart," I said, "if it's going to blow." "Probably." I waited for her to say something else, but she didn't. She was looking at the radio again. Not staring exactly, just aware of it. Less than a minute passed, maybe 40 seconds. The radio crackled again. This time the voice that came through was Aurora's. "I'm not joking." It sounded exactly like her. Same low tone, same coastal cadence, same flatness she used when she was trying to keep something calm. "Jackson," the voice said, "come down to the dock right now." I looked at Aurora. She was standing 3 feet from me, holding a tin cup with both hands. Her mouth was closed. She wasn't touching the radio. The voice on the radio said my name again. "Jackson, you need to come down to the dock immediately." Aurora set the cup on the table. Slow, didn't take her eyes off the radio. I stood up, crossed to the shelf in 2 steps, and picked up the radio. My hand was steady. I pressed the button. "Repeat last transmission," I said, static for a second. Then the voice came back, calmer this time, almost irritated. "Jackson, come to the dock now." It was her voice. I'd heard Aurora talk enough times to know the shape of her words, the way she dropped consonants at the end of sentences, the slight rasp when she gave instructions. But Aurora was right there, watching me, not speaking. I pressed the button again. "Who is this?" Nothing. I waited 5 seconds. 10. The channel dropped dead. Not static, just silence. Like whoever was holding the button on the other end let go and walked away. I set the radio down on the shelf. My heart was doing something I didn't like, fast but uneven. I turned around. Aurora was still by the table. She hadn't moved except to let go of the cup. "That wasn't me," she said. "I know. Someone's got a radio." "Yeah." She looked at the door, then the windows, then back at me. "Could be someone screwing around," she said. Didn't sound like she believed it. I didn't answer. I was thinking about the list, about the boots and the voices and the whistling, about the way Aurora said she followed the rules because caution didn't hurt. "We should lock the door," I said. Aurora nodded once. She walked to the door and turned the deadbolt. It slid into place with a solid click. Old hardware, but it worked. She checked the handle. "Locked windows," I said. "They latch from inside." She moved to the nearest one and flipped the metal latch down. Did the same with the other 2. None of them had curtains thick enough to block our silhouettes if we had a light on, but I figured that didn't matter. If someone was out there, they already knew we were here. I went back to the table and looked at the list taped to the wall. Read it again, even though I'd already memorized it. Keep porch light off after dark. Don't answer voices from the trees. Never follow whistling. Boots stay inside because tracks invite visitors. If you hear knocking, wait until morning. Aurora came back to the table. She looked at the list too. We follow it, she said. Yeah. Porch lights already off. Yeah. She pulled her fleece tighter. It wasn't cold inside. The stove was still going, but I got it. I sat down. My boots were near the stove where I'd left them earlier. I thought about putting them on. If we had to move fast in the dark, I'd rather have boots than socks. But the list said, boots stay inside, tracks invite visitors. I left them where they were. Aurora sat across from me. She picked up her coffee again, but it had gone cold. She drank it anyway. Outside, the wind picked up. I could hear it in the trees, a low, steady sound that made the cabin boards creak in places. Nothing unusual, just weather. Then I heard the whistle, low, drifting in from the direction of the shoreline. Could have been wind through a gap in the rocks. Could have been a bird I didn't recognize. Could have been a person standing down by the dock with a radio and a sick sense of humor. I looked at Aurora. She heard it too. I could tell by the way her jaw tightened. We didn't answer it. We didn't get up. We didn't go to the window. The whistle came again. Same pitch, same direction. Then it stopped. I waited, counted to 30 in my head. Nothing else. Aurora set her cup down. "We're staying inside," she said. Quiet, firm. "Yeah, no matter what we hear." "Okay." She nodded, looked at the door again like she was making sure the lock was still holding, even though we've just checked it. I stood up and went to the nearest window. Didn't get close. Just looked at the latch to confirm it was down. It was. The glass was dark now. Full night outside. I couldn't see the trees anymore. Couldn't see the beach. Just my own reflection and the dim orange glow from the stove behind me. "I'm checking the porch," Aurora said. "I'll go. We'll both go." She moved to the door and I followed. She unlocked the deadbolt, opened the door 6 inches, and looked out. I stood behind her and looked over her shoulder. The porch was empty. 2 steps down to the path, trees maybe 15 feet past that. Everything else was black. The kind of dark you get on islands with no light pollution and heavy cloud cover. I couldn't see the dock, couldn't see the water, couldn't see anything past the edge of the porch boards. Aurora pulled the door shut and locked it again. "Nothing," she said. "Yeah, but I didn't feel better." The porch being empty didn't mean much when you couldn't see past it. I went back to the table and sat down. Aurora stayed by the door for another minute. Then she walked to her cot and sat on the edge. She didn't lie down, just sat there with her hands on her knees. I looked at my boots again. They were right there, 10 feet away, easy to grab if I needed them. But the list said, "Keep them inside. Tracks invite visitors." I thought about that, about what it meant. If I wore boots outside, I'd leave prints in the mud and sand. Someone could follow them back, could know exactly where I'd gone and when. Could stand outside the door and know I was inside because the tracks led here and didn't lead away. I left the boots where they were. The wind pushed against the cabin. Not hard, just steady. I heard something creak on the porch again. Same sound as earlier. Could have been the board settling. Could have been the roof shifting. Could have been weight on the top step. I didn't get up to check. Aurora was watching the door. I was watching the windows. Neither of us said anything. The radio sat on the shelf, silent now. Christina said to keep it on channel 6. We were doing that, but I didn't trust it anymore. It had lied once. Used Aurora's voice to call me down to the dock when Aurora was standing right next to me. If it could lie about that, it could lie about anything. I thought about Christina's transmission, the weather warning, the delayed pickup. It sounded like her. Same clipped tone, same procedural phrasing. But I hadn't seen her face.
hadn't confirmed it was actually her on the other end. Maybe that one was real and the second one was fake. Maybe both were fake. Maybe someone was out there with a radio and a recording and a plan I didn't understand yet. I didn't know. Couldn't know. Not until morning, when Jimmy either showed up or didn't. Aurora lay down on her cot. Didn't take off her fleece. Didn't get under the blanket. Just lay on top of it with her boots still on and her eyes open. I stayed at the table. The stove was warm. The cabin was quiet except for the wind and the creaking. My coffee was cold, but I didn't care. The night felt like it was setting a trap. Something out there wanted me on the dock, wanted me outside, wanted me moving in the dark without boots, or with boots. Or maybe it didn't matter because either way, I'd be exposed. The radio had already proved it could lie. I wasn't going anywhere. Around midnight, the rain kept going, but the forest went quiet in a way that felt wrong. I'd been sitting near the stove for hours. My back hurt from the wooden chair. Aurora had taken the cot near the door and told me to get some sleep, but I couldn't. So, I stayed where I was with my hands around a cup that had gone cold sometime before 11. The rain hit the roof steady and hard. Normal September storm, but underneath it there was nothing else. No wind in the trees, no branches scraping, no small animals moving through the underbrush or settling into their dens for the night. Just rain on metal and wood and silence everywhere else.
I kept waiting for something to break it. An owl, maybe? Or a raven calling from the ridge? Even the sound of water dripping off the eaves would have been fine, but there was nothing. The forest had shut down completely. I set the cup on the table and leaned back in the chair. The stove ticked next to me, cooling down from the last log I'd fed it maybe 20 minutes earlier. I should have added another. The temperature was dropping, but I didn't move. I just sat there listening to the rain and the quiet and trying to convince myself it was normal. It wasn't normal. I'd done enough field assignments by now to know what the woods were supposed to sound like at night. Even in bad weather, there was always something. Mice in the walls, branches settling, the creak of trees shifting their weight. This wasn't that. This was the kind of silence that made you hold your breath without meaning to. I checked the windows, still latched, door still locked, boots still by the stove where I'd left them, porch light off. We'd followed every rule on the list. Didn't matter. I couldn't relax. Aurora shifted on the cot and I glanced over. She was on her side facing the wall, one arm tucked under the thin pillow. Her breathing had evened out maybe an hour ago, and I'd figured she was asleep. Good for her. One of us should be. I looked back at the stove and thought about adding wood. My hands felt stiff. I flexed my fingers and stood up slow, trying not to make the chair scrape. That's when Aurora spoke. "You hear it too?" Her voice was quiet, not a question. I turned and she was still facing the wall, hadn't moved at all. "Yeah," I said. She sat up and swung her legs off the cot. Her boots were on. I had noticed that earlier. She must have laced them back up after we locked down for the night. Aurora rubbed her face with both hands and looked at the door, then the windows, then me. "This kind of silence," she said, "usually means the animals are hiding from something." I nodded. Didn't ask what. Didn't need to. She stood and walked to the table, pulled out the other chair, and sat down across from where I'd been. She didn't look tired, just alert, the way you get when your body decides sleep isn't the priority anymore. "Could be a bear," I said. Didn't believe it, but I said it anyway. Aurora shook her head once. "Bear moves through. Animals go quiet for a minute, then they start up again.
This has been going for a while. Yeah. She looked at the list on the wall, read it again, even though we both had it memorized by now. Then she looked back at me. We stay inside, she said. I know. No matter what. I know. She nodded and leaned back in the chair. Her hands rested flat on the table, steady. I sat back down across from her and we waited. The smell hit maybe 10 minutes later. It came in slow. I didn't notice it at first. Then I did, and I couldn't stop noticing it. Crushed alder leaves. I recognized that part right away. Sharp and green and bitter, the way they smell when you step on them after rain. But underneath it, there was something else. Something sweet and wrong. Rotten fruit, maybe, or meat that had been left out in the heat too long. The two smells didn't belong together, but there they were, seeping in through the gaps around the door and the window frames. Aurora's nose wrinkled. She smelled it too. I didn't say anything, just breathed through my mouth and tried not to think about what could make a smell like that. Then the scraping started. Soft at first. So soft I thought I was imagining it. But it kept going slow and steady, dragging across the porch boards from left to right, then back again, left to right, over and over. It sounded like fingernails on wet wood. My chest tightened. I looked at Aurora, and she was staring at the door with her jaw set and her hands still flat on the table. She didn't move, didn't tell me it was fine or that it was probably just a branch. The scraping continued. Same rhythm, same pressure, like someone testing the surface, feeling it out. I stood up. Didn't plan to, just did. Aurora's eyes flicked to me, but she didn't say anything. I crossed to the nearest window, the one facing the porch. My hands were shaking a little, so I shoved them in my pockets. The curtain was just a bedsheet tied with paracord, thin. I could see the faint glow of rain through it, but nothing else.
The scraping kept going. I reached up and lifted the curtain, just a fraction, just enough to see. The darkness outside was complete. No moon, no stars, just black and rain and the faint outline of the porch railing. And then I saw it, a pale oval too close to the glass, right where a face should be. No features, no eyes or mouth or nose, just a smooth, pale shape pressed up against the window watching. I dropped the curtain. My heart was going hard now, fast and uneven. I stepped back from the window and turned to Aurora. "There's something out there," I said, kept my voice level, didn't try to make it sound worse than it was, just told her. "What did you see?" she asked, still sitting, still calm. A face, I think, right against the glass. She stood up then, didn't go to the window, just stood and looked at me for a long second. Then she crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed my wrist hard. Her fingers dug in and I felt the pressure all the way to the bone. "Stop," she said. I blinked. "What?" "Stop hunting proof." Her voice was low and tight. "Focus on surviving." I didn't argue, didn't pull away. She was right. I knew she was right. She let go of my wrist and walked to the door. The lockbox key was hanging on a small hook next to the frame. We hadn't touched it since we got here. Didn't need to. The box was bolted shut, and we didn't have a reason to open it. Aurora took the key off the hook and slipped it into her jacket pocket. "Why?" I asked. "In case we need to move fast," she said. I looked at the lockbox, tried to remember what was usually in those things. Flares, maybe. Emergency radio, first aid supplies. Nothing that would help us right now. But Aurora pocketed the key anyway. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer, the ceiling lower. I looked at the list again, and the handwriting didn't look like a joke anymore. It looked like instructions,
practical ones written by someone who'd been exactly where we were now. The scraping outside stopped. I waited, counted to 10, then 20. Nothing. Aurora stayed by the door. I stayed by the window. We didn't talk, didn't move. The rain kept falling, the stove kept ticking, and somewhere outside in the dark, whatever had been on the porch was still there, waiting for us to make one wrong choice. The radio crackled maybe 3 minutes after the scraping stopped. I'd been counting my breaths to keep track of time. Somewhere around 60 breaths in, the static came back. Then Christina's voice cut through clean and clipped. "Cooper, George, this is Lewis. Weather window opening at 0500. Float plane inbound for emergency pickup from the bay. Be ready at first light with all gear. Acknowledge." Aurora looked at me from her position by the door. I looked at the radio on the shelf. Christina's voice again. "Cooper, George, acknowledge." Aurora crossed to the shelf and picked up the radio, but didn't press the button yet. She held it close to her ear like she was listening for something underneath the words. I understood that I was doing the same thing. The transmission sounded exactly like Christina. Same routine tone, same procedural phrasing, same impatience when she had to repeat herself. It even had that slight distortion from the district office radio she always used. The one with the busted squelch that made everything sound a little compressed. That's what bugged me. It was too normal, too perfectly what you'd expect to hear. I'd heard the fake Aurora maybe an hour ago. That one had her voice, her cadence, her exact way of dropping consonants at the end of instructions. But it hadn't been her. She'd been standing 3 feet away, holding a coffee cup. Now, this transmission had Christina's voice, Christina's phrasing, Christina's everything, and I had no way to confirm she was actually in the district office, 20 meters across open water, and not standing outside in the dark with a radio. Aurora pressed the button. George acknowledging. Float plane pickup 0500, bay location. All gear ready. She released the button and waited. Confirmed. Christina's voice said, deteriorating after 0600. Do not miss this window. Lewis out. The radio went silent. Aurora set it back on the shelf and turned to me. Her face looked tired. Not scared, just tired in that specific way people get when they've been managing a bad situation for too long. I said, we shouldn't go. Aurora nodded once, but didn't agree out loud. I kept going. That could be the same thing that copied your voice. It wants us out of the cabin.
Wants us in the open or on the water. Aurora said, could be. So we ignore it. We stay inside until actual daylight, and then we reassess. Aurora walked back to the table and sat down. She looked at the 2 batteries sitting there between us, the broken one with the cracked casing and corroded terminals, the sealed replacement still in shrink wrap. She said, if that was really Christina and we don't show up, we miss the only pickup before the weather turns. I said, if it wasn't Christina, we walked straight into whatever's out there. Yeah. Aurora picked up the broken battery and turned it over in her hands. Water damage all through the casing, terminals green with corrosion. This thing had been dead for weeks, maybe months, and the replacement had been sitting here, waiting, with an April date stamped on the shrink wrap. Someone knew we'd be here, knew we'd need to replace this battery, staged it so we'd have the task, but not the working equipment to report back. Aurora set the battery down. If we miss a real pickup, we're stuck here with no working radio and a storm coming. Christina said weather closes after 0600. That's real. I checked the marine forecast yesterday. Low pressure system moving in from the Gulf,
By tomorrow night, this whole area is going to be socked in for days. I said, we have supplies for maybe 4 days if we're careful. The cash is low. You saw it. I had 3 days of canned goods, 1 propane canister, opened first aid kit, missing half the bandages. Aurora kept going. Her voice stayed level, but I could hear the edge underneath. If we're here a week with no comms, Christina's going to assume something went wrong. She'll send someone eventually, but not until the weather clears. That could be 10 days, 2 weeks. I didn't say anything. She was right, and we both knew it. Aurora said, and if that transmission was real and we ignore it, we are the seasonal employees who didn't follow instructions during an emergency pickup. Christina will document that. You know she will. I knew she would. Christina documented everything. Every missed radio check, every late report, every deviation from procedure. She'd called me at 6 a.m. for schedule changes and sent me to verify work that didn't need verifying, just to keep a paper trail. If we ignored a legitimate emergency pickup order, that would be the kind of thing that ended contracts. Not just mine, Aurora's too. But if we walked out there into the fog and the thing that had scraped the porch was waiting, Aurora said, we're stuck. That was it exactly. Stuck between rules that said don't answer voices and don't go outside, and job reality that said you follow supervisor instructions or you lose your position. I looked at the list taped above the table, the thick black marker, the yellowed tape edges that someone had pressed down recently. Don't answer voices from the trees. Never follow whistling. If you hear knocking, wait until morning. Boots stay inside because tracks invite visitors. I said, we go, but we follow the list. Aurora looked at me. How? Boots inside. We carry them. Walk in socks. Don't leave clear tracks. Aurora thought about that. Her jaw worked to one side. Then she nodded. Treat it like field guidance. Yeah. She stood up and started gathering her gear, rolled her sleeping pad tight and strapped it to her pack, checked the rifle case was secure, pulled on her fleece even though the cabin was warm from the stove. I packed my own stuff, extra clothes into the pack, camera and waterproof battery case into the outer pocket. Food stayed separated in a stuff sack. I pulled everything tight and clipped the compression straps. The whole time I kept thinking about that transmission. Christina's voice, too perfect, too routine, but also maybe real. That's what made it worse, not knowing. Aurora picked up both batteries from the table and put them in her jacket pockets, the broken one on the left, the replacement on the right. Then she took the handheld radio from the shelf and clipped it to her belt. She said, we move fast, straight to the dock, no stopping. I said, okay. She checked her watch. First lights in 20 minutes. We leave in 15. I pulled my boots on to tie the laces tight, then took them off again and held them in one hand. My socks were thick wool. They'd get wet and probably torn up on the trail, but they wouldn't leave boot prints. Aurora watched me do this. Then she did the same thing, laced her boots tight, pulled them off, held them in her left hand.
We waited the last 15 minutes, standing by the door. The rain had stopped outside. I couldn't hear anything beyond the cabin walls. No wind, no branches, no animal sounds. Just that same wrong silence. Aurora unlocked the deadbolt at exactly 4:45. Gray light was just starting to show through the windows. Not sunrise, just the sky getting less dark. She opened the door slow, looked left, then right, then stepped out onto the porch in her socks. I followed her out and pulled the door shut behind me, but didn't lock it. Didn't seem like the kind of thing that mattered anymore. The porch boards were wet and cold under my feet. I didn't look down to check for scratches. Didn't want to see them. Aurora went down the steps and I stayed close behind her. We crossed the clearing in front of the cabin, walking carefully to avoid sharp rocks and broken sticks. The ground was soft from rain, moss, and pine needles. My socks soaked through in the first 10 steps. The tree line started maybe 30 feet from the cabin. Aurora led us into it on the same trail we'd used yesterday to check the cache. Narrow path, moss and dirt, roots across it in places. I kept my eyes on Aurora's back and my boots in my right hand. The pack pulled at my shoulders. Rifle case strapped across Aurora's back shifted when she moved. We passed the cache platform, kept going toward the beach. That's when the fog hit. Not gradual, just suddenly there, thick and white and flat, filling the spaces between trees and erasing everything past 10 feet. I could see Aurora in front of me, could see the immediate tree trunks on either side of the trail. Everything else disappeared. The bay was close, maybe a 100-yard. I could smell salt water and seaweed and wet wood from the dock. Then I heard the engine, far out, low and steady. Float-equipped plane, probably a beaver or an otter, throttled down for approach. I stopped walking. Aurora stopped too. We both listened. The engine sound grew a little louder, then leveled off, then started to fade, like the plane was circling or drifting with the current. Then I lost it completely. Just fog and silence and the smell of salt water. Aurora turned to look at me. Her face was gray in the dim light. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just stood there in our socks on the trail, holding our boots, listening to nothing. The radio spat static so loud I flinched, even though I'd been holding it in my hand for the last 30 seconds. Aurora's head snapped toward me. Then Christina's voice came through, clear and urgent. "Cooper, George, plane is on final approach. Need you visible at the shoreline. Wave them in." I looked at Aurora. She looked at the radio. Neither of us moved. Christina's voice again, sharper this time. "Acknowledge." Aurora reached over and took the radio from my hand. She pressed the button. "George, here. Copy." She didn't say we'd do it, just that she heard. Christina signed off. The channel went silent. Aurora handed the radio back to me, and I clipped it to my belt. My socks were already soaked through from the sand, and I could feel every cold grain under my feet. The fog hadn't lifted. If anything, it had gotten thicker, sitting low over the water in a solid gray wall that cut visibility down to maybe 40 feet. "Waving doesn't even make sense for a plane," Aurora said. Her voice was flat, practical. "Pilots looking for the bay, for the dock, not for people on the shore." I nodded. That was true. Float planes didn't need ground crew waving them in. They needed coordinates and a clear stretch of water. That was it. Aurora turned toward the tree line, then back to the water. "Signaling might matter in ways we don't understand." The way she said it made my chest tighten. Not like she was guessing, like she'd worked something out and didn't want to say it directly. I looked down at the sand. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Bare footprints, deep and heavy, with sharp edges pressed into the wet sand where the tide had pulled back. They came from the tree line in a straight line, crossed the beach, and stopped right at the waterline. Then another set ran parallel, heading back toward the trees. Fresh, the edges were clean, no erosion from wind or water yet. I'd been watching the ground the whole walk down from the cabin, checking for roots and rocks because my socks were thin and every stick jabbed straight through to my heel. I would have seen prints this obvious. These weren't here 2 minutes ago, and they definitely weren't ours.
I wore a men's size 10. Aurora probably wore a 7 or 8. These were bigger, longer. The toes were spread wide like whoever made them had been walking barefoot for years, and their feet had flattened out. The heel strikes were so deep they'd punched through the top layer of sand into the darker, wet layer underneath. Aurora. She turned, followed my eyes, stopped talking. We both stared at the prints for a few seconds, maybe 5, maybe 10. They stopped exactly at the waterline, right where the last wave had left a thin line of foam and broken kelp, like whatever made them had walked straight into the bay and kept going, or stepped in and vanished. I crouched down without thinking, got close enough to see the details. No arch. The ball of the foot was wide, and the toes were long, human-shaped, but wrong in a way I couldn't name. Aurora grabbed my shoulder and pulled me back up. Don't touch them. I hadn't planned to, but I also hadn't planned to crouch down next to them like I was investigating a trail marker. The fog shifted. I looked up. There was a shape moving through it, low over the water, maybe 100 feet out. It had the outline of a float plane, wings, pontoons, a fuselage. But it was like looking at a sketch someone had drawn from memory and gotten almost right. The proportions were off. The wings were too narrow, the pontoon sat too low, and the whole thing moved wrong, smooth and steady. No bounce or drift from wind, no correction in the glide path, no engine sound. Float planes are loud, especially on approach. You hear them coming from a mile out. That deep growl of the engine throttling back, the props biting air. This thing was silent, just the fog moving around it, pulling and bending like it was being dragged through water instead of air. I couldn't see the cockpit, couldn't see if there was a pilot, just the shape sliding through the gray. The radio crackled again. Cooper, George, I need you out where the plane can see you now. Move to the shoreline and signal. Christina's voice exactly the same, procedural, impatient. The kind of tone she used when she was managing a situation and didn't have time for questions. Aurora was staring at the shape in the fog. Her jaw was tight, and her hand was still on my shoulder. I looked at the footprints again, at the treen, at the dock behind us. Then I looked at the cabin, barely visible now through the fog and the trees, maybe 60 feet uphill from where we stood. The list. Keep porch light off after dark. Don't answer voices from the trees. Never follow whistling. Boots stay inside because tracks invite visitors. If you hear knocking, wait until morning. Those weren't jokes. They weren't superstition from bored seasonal employees trying to freak out the next crew. They were survival instructions. And Christina had sent us here anyway. She'd assigned this trip, picked the timing, paired me with Aurora specifically, handed over the key and the coordinates, and told us it'd be 1 or 2 nights depending on weather. She knew about Ela Bay. She had to. You didn't write rules that specific unless people had learned them the hard way. unless the Forest Service had a file somewhere with incident reports and missing person cases and explanations that didn't add up. Christina knew this place was wrong, and she sent us here with a broken radio battery and a replacement that had been staged on the table like bait. Aurora moved fast. She pulled the new battery from her right jacket pocket, snapped it onto the handheld radio, still clipped to my belt, and twisted the volume knob all the way down until it was nearly silent. I could still see the channel indicator glowing green, still transmitting, but no sound came through. Then she reached into her left pocket and pulled out the broken battery, held it in both hands, looked at it for a second like she was weighing something. She turned and walked toward the end of the dock. Her socks left wet prints on the weathered boards. She moved carefully, testing each plank before putting her weight down. And I realized she was making sure the dock would hold, that she wouldn't fall through. At the far end, right where the dock met open water, she crouched down and set the broken battery on the boards gently, like she was placing an offering at a shrine. I understood what she was doing about half a second too late. Aurora. I stepped forward, reached for her. The air tightened. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the pressure changed all at once. Like the whole bay took a breath inward and held it. The fog pulled closer, thicker. It didn't drift.
It moved with intention, sliding in from the water and wrapping around the dock pilings and creeping up onto the sand. Aurora stood up slowly and backed away from the battery. 3 steps. 4. She didn't turn around, just kept her eyes on the water. The shape in the fog was closer now, maybe 50 feet out. I could see the wings more clearly. They didn't move, didn't tilt or adjust. The whole thing just glided forward in a straight line. Pontoons skimming the surface of the water without making a wake. No ripples, no spray, nothing. My hand was still outstretched toward Aurora. She glanced at it, then at me, and shook her head once. Don't. I dropped my arm. The bay pressed inward again. I felt it in my chest, in my ears, like standing too close to a speaker before the sound kicks in. Aurora took another step back. Her boot was still in her left hand, laces tied tight. She hadn't put it down once. The radio on my belt vibrated. I looked down and saw the channel indicator flashing. Someone was transmitting, but the volume was down and I couldn't hear what they were saying. I didn't turn it up. Aurora's eyes were still locked on the shape in the fog on the dock, on the broken battery sitting at the end like a marker. The air stayed tight, the fog stayed close, and the shape kept coming. The pull hit me low in my chest, not like thinking about moving forward, like something already decided I would, and my body was just catching up. I'd felt it once before, when I crouched down to look at the footprints in the sand, right before Aurora grabbed my shoulder and pulled me back. This time, she couldn't reach me. She was still 3 steps away on the dock, boots in her left hand, eyes locked on the shape sliding through the fog. I took half a step toward the water. Aurora's head snapped toward me. Her eyes went wide, and she moved fast, waving her free hand hard in a cutting motion. Not just stop, more like get out. She mouthed something I couldn't hear over the pressure in my ears, and pointed back toward the cabin with her whole arm extended. Run. I understood that part. I reached for her anyway, grabbed her forearm to pull her with me. Her skin was cold, not damp morning cold or wind off the water cold. Cold like meat from a freezer, like something that hadn't been warm in hours. I let go on reflex, and she didn't react. Didn't look at me, didn't pull away. Her face went slack, mouth open just slightly. Eyes still fixed on the shape in the fog, but not focused anymore. Not tracking it, listening. That's what it looked like. She was hearing something I couldn't. And whatever it was louder than me saying her name, louder than my hand on her arm, louder than anything I could do to pull her back. I said her name again. Aurora. Nothing. The shape was maybe 30 feet out now. Wings still too narrow, pontoons still too low, no engine sound at all. I made the choice. I let go, turned, and ran. My socks hit wet sand, and I didn't care about the rocks anymore. Didn't care about anything except getting back to the cabin and slamming that door and throwing the deadbolt before whatever was out there decided I was more interesting than Aurora. Probably cost her. I knew that even while I was running. Probably cost her the second I let go. Behind me, I heard a wet slap. Heavy, like a salmon hitting a dock after a bad throw. Then a long exhale that didn't match the wind or the fog or anything natural I'd ever heard in 6 months of field work. It sounded patient. I didn't look back. Not yet. Just kept my eyes on the tree line and the gap between the alders where the trail cut through. My pack bounced hard against my spine, and the boots in my hand smacked my thigh with every step. The trail was soft. Moss and needles turned to mud from the rain. My socks slid, and I went down on one knee, caught myself with my free hand, kept moving. Cabin was 60 feet uphill, 50, 40. I hit the porch steps, and that's when I looked back through the trees. I could see the end of the dock. The shape was there now, tall, taller than it should have been if it was a plane. And it wasn't a plane anymore. Or maybe it never was. It bent the fog around itself, not like wind moving through, like the fog was avoiding it, pulling back to make space. The shape leaned down close to Aurora's head. Too close, like it was smelling her hair or tasting the air near her mouth, sampling her breath. That's what it looked like. Aurora didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there with her boots still in her left hand and her face still slack and empty.
Then she stepped off the dock. Not a slip, not a stumble. One deliberate step into open water. She went under to her knees, then her waist, then her chest. The fog closed around her, and she kept walking with steady purpose, like she was following a trail only she could see. No struggle, no sound. Just gone. I didn't wait to see if she'd come back up. I turned, crossed the porch in 2 steps, shoved the door open, slammed it shut behind me, and threw the deadbolt so hard the frame shook. Then I sat down on the floor with my back pressed against the door and my knees pulled up and my boots still clutched in both hands. The radio was still clipped to my belt with the volume turned almost all the way down. The channel indicator glowed green. I could hear faint static if I held my breath. I didn't touch it. The windows were still latched, curtains still tied with paracord, stove still ticking from last night's fire. I watched the window facing the porch, didn't lift the curtain, just watched the shape of it and the gray light coming through the bedsheet fabric. The silence came back heavy this time, pressed down on the roof and the walls and my chest, until I had to focus on breathing in and out at a normal rhythm so I wouldn't hyperventilate. No wind, no branches, no rain. Just the cabin and me and whatever was outside.
The whistle started maybe 10 minutes later. Low, patient. Same pitch as before, coming from somewhere near the porch, but not on it. Maybe 5 T out, maybe 10. I didn't move. The whistle came again, closer this time, right at the wall next to the door. Then a voice, Aurora's voice. She said my name. Jackson said she was freezing, said she needed to come in. Same flat tone, same cadence, same slight rasp at the end of sentences. I stayed put, didn't answer, didn't get up, didn't touch the deadbolt. The voice said it again. Jackson, I'm freezing. Let me in. I looked down at my boots, still tied tight, laces double knotted the way I always did them. I held them against my chest so I wouldn't put them down, wouldn't be tempted to put them on, wouldn't leave prints if I had to move fast. The voice kept talking for a while, maybe an hour, maybe 2. I stopped listening to the words and just waited for it to stop. Eventually, it did. 2 days later, the skiff came in. I heard the engine first. Real engine, sputtering and uneven and backfiring once when it throttled down. I was still inside, still had my boots in my lap. The radio battery had died sometime during the first night, and I hadn't replaced it. Didn't need to. I looked through the window without lifting the curtain and saw the skiff bump against the dock. 3 people. Christina got out first, then a guy I didn't know with neat hair and rectangular glasses, then a woman with a ponytail and a clipped-on ID badge. I put my boots on, laced them up, opened the door. Christina saw me and walked up the trail without calling out. The other 2 followed. She stopped at the porch steps and looked at me. Her face didn't change. "Where's George?" she said. I told her Aurora went into the water at the dock 2 days ago and didn't come back up. Christina nodded once, didn't ask why, didn't ask what happened before that, didn't ask if I tried to stop her. The guy with glasses wrote something on a clipboard. The woman looked at the cabin, then at me, then back at Christina. Christina said the paperwork would say Aurora slipped at the dock during the pickup. Weather conditions, wet boards, unfortunate but not uncommon. She asked if I understood. I said yes. Christina walked past me into the cabin. I stayed on the porch with the other 2. Neither of them said anything. Through the door, I could see Christina moving around inside. She picked up the broken radio battery from the table, put it in her jacket pocket, checked the shelves, looked at the stove. Then she stopped in front of the list taped to the wall. She pulled it down carefully, folded it twice, put it in her other pocket like routine documentation. When she came back out, she told me to get my gear. I grabbed my pack from inside. Everything was still there. Camera, waterproof case, extra clothes. We walked down to the skiff in a line. Christina first, then me, then the guy with glasses, then the woman. Nobody looked at the sand. I climbed into the skiff and sat on the bench near the back. My socks were still wet inside my boots. I hadn't changed them. The guy with glasses started the engine. The woman untied the line. Christina sat across from me and didn't say anything for the first 20 minutes. Then she asked if I had any questions about the report. I said no. She said good. Said I'd be reassigned to office work for the rest of the season. Said it was standard procedure after an incident. I looked back at the bay as we pulled away. The fog was still there, thicker now, covering the dock and the beach and the cabin. I understood something I hadn't before. The list wasn't a joke, wasn't superstition. Boots stay inside because tracks invite visitors. I'd kept my boots in my hands the whole time, hadn't put them down, Hadn't left prints inside the cabin or on the porch after I ran back. Aurora had left wet sock prints on the dock all the way to the end, right to where she put the battery down, right to where the shape leaned close and sampled her breath. Maybe that's what it needed, a trail to follow, permission to come closer. Maybe keeping my boots off the ground was the only reason I made it back. I didn't ask Christina if that was true. I just rode back to Ketchikan in wet socks with my boots on and my pack between my knees, watching the water and the fog and the island slide past until the harbor came into view.